As the sun painted the sky crimson, Maria pulled her old car to the side of the dirt road. Her hands trembled as she turned off the engine, and for several moments she sat motionless, watching her 8-year-old daughter Isabela sleeping peacefully in the back seat through the rearview mirror. The little girl was exhausted from their long journey, blissfully unaware of the torment consuming her mother. Maria wiped away the stubborn tears that kept falling. The past few weeks had been a nightmare that drove her to consider the unthinkable. As the CFO of a mid-sized company, she had uncovered an embezzlement scheme involving the CEO and several executives. At first, she tried to ignore the documents that had fallen into her hands, but each new discovery made it impossible to maintain her silence. When she finally gathered the courage to report the irregularities to the board, the threats began. They started subtly hostile glances in the hallways, emails with veiled messages. Then they escalated to midnight phone calls and suspicious cars parked outside her house. "You have such a beautiful daughter," the man who approached her in Isabela's school parking lot 3 days ago had said, his voice low and menacing. "It would be a shame if something happened to her." It wasn't an empty threat. Maria knew what these people were capable of. She had tried seeking help from the authorities, but without concrete evidence of the threats, there was little they could do. Her parents had passed away years ago, and she had no other close relatives. Her friends, though concerned, were too afraid to get involved. The only person who offered help was her former nanny, Dona Carmen, who lived in a small settlement on the other side of the desert. "Bring the girl here," Dona Carmen had said over the phone, her voice firm and reassuring. "Nobody will find her in this middle of nowhere. I'll take care of her while you sort this mess out." The plan was simple yet heartbreaking. Maria would leave Isabela near the lone tree that marked the path to Dona Carmen's settlement, an old acacia that stood solitary in the vast arid expanse, known to all locals as a landmark. Dona Carmen would come for Isabela after nightfall. Maria opened the trunk and retrieved the backpack she had packed so carefully. Clothes, water, some snacks, a small blanket, and a letter explaining everything she could to her daughter. The letter had been the hardest part. How do you explain to a child that temporary abandonment is an act of protection? "My dearest Isabela," the letter read, "when you read this, I'll be gone. I know this will be hard to understand, but I had to do this to keep you safe. Bad people are trying to hurt us, and this was the only way I could protect you. Dona Carmen will come for you. Stay by the tree and trust her. As soon as it's safe, I'll come back for you. You are the most important person in my life. Please forgive me for having to do this. With all my love, Mom." With a heavy heart, Maria stepped out of the car and opened the back door. Isabela was sleeping deeply, her breathing soft and steady. For a moment, Maria considered abandoning everything, hitting the road and running away with her daughter. But she knew they couldn't live like that forever, always running, always afraid. Gently, she lifted Isabela into her arms. The girl stirred slightly but didn't wake, trusting in her mother's embrace. The familiar scent of strawberry shampoo made Maria choke back a sob. Each step toward the tree felt heavier than the last. The solitary acacia stood against the crimson sky, its leaves swaying gently in the evening breeze. It was an ancient tree with a thick trunk and twisted branches that cast a generous shade. Here, Isabela would be sheltered from the sun while waiting for Dona Carmen. Maria laid her daughter carefully beneath the tree, where the ground was softer. She placed the backpack beside her and, with trembling fingers, tucked a loose strand of hair behind the girl's ear. "Forgive me, my love," she whispered, her voice breaking. "We'll be together again soon." She allowed herself one more moment to memorize every detail of her daughter's face, the long eyelashes, the soft freckles dusting her nose, the way her lips curved even in sleep. Then, gathering all her strength, she stood and walked back to the car. Each step away from Isabela was torture. Her legs felt like lead, and her heart screamed for her to turn back. But Maria knew she had to be strong. This was the only way to keep her daughter safe while she gathered the evidence needed to expose the company's corruption. When she reached the car, Maria let a few tears roll down her face. She started the engine, knowing the noise would wake Isabela. This would be the hardest part, leaving while hearing her daughter's cries. As expected, Isabela woke startled by the engine's sound. Through the rearview mirror, Maria watched her daughter rise, confused and disoriented. The first cry of "Mommy" cut through the air like an arrow, striking Maria straight in the heart. "Mommy, don't go. Please, Mommy." Maria gripped the steering wheel so tight her knuckles turned white, forcing herself to keep driving as tears blurred her vision. Isabela's screams grew more distant until they were swallowed by the engine's hum and the desert's vastness. "I love you, my little one," Maria whispered to herself, watching Isabela's diminishing figure in the rearview mirror. more than you'll ever know. The sun finally set on the horizon, plunging the desert into growing shadows. Maria kept driving, leaving her heart behind with her daughter. She had much work ahead, gathering evidence, presenting it to the proper authorities, and ensuring those responsible would be punished. Only then could she return for Isabela. Meanwhile, beneath the ancient acacia, a frightened girl began her wait, unaware that her life was about to change forever. Isabela remained paralyzed for several minutes after her mother's car disappeared on the horizon. Her screams had left her throat raw, and now only silent sobs shook her small body. The backpack beside her seemed to weigh a ton, though she hadn't yet found the courage to open it. The sun was setting quickly and the air was beginning to cool. In the desert, temperature changes were dramatic, the scorching heat of day giving way to the biting cold of night. Isabela huddled against the acacia's trunk, trying to process what had happened. Why would her mother leave her here? What had she done wrong? With trembling hands she finally reached for the backpack. Inside she found a water bottle, packets of cookies, granola bars, some changes of clothes, and at the bottom, an envelope with her name written in her mother's careful handwriting. Isabela held the envelope for a long time before finding the courage to open it. The letter explained about bad people, about danger, about someone named Dona Carmen who would come for her. But to 8-year-old Isabela, the words seemed to make no sense. How could there be bad people wanting to hurt them? Her mother was the nicest person she knew. She worked in a big office, always brought presents for her colleagues, helped everyone. The past few weeks began to make more sense in her childish mind. Her mother quieter than usual, the late-night phone calls, the curtains always drawn. Isabela had noticed something was wrong, but her mother always said everything was fine, that it was just work. As the night deepened, the cold intensified. Isabela pulled on the sweatshirt she'd found in the backpack and wrapped herself in the blanket. The desert darkness was terrifying, shadows danced with the wind, and strange sounds echoed across the vastness. Every noise made her jump, hoping it was Dona Carmen arriving. The hours crawled by. Isabela tried to stay awake, but emotional exhaustion was taking its toll. Her eyes burned from crying and her stomach growled, though she had no appetite. She kept watching the road, waiting to see headlights, any sign that someone was coming for her. "Please come soon," she whispered to herself, hugging her knees. "Please?" Fear began giving way to panic as the moon rose high in the sky and still no one had appeared. What if Dona Carmen didn't come? What if she got lost? What if something had happened to her on the way? Isabela didn't know this woman. Her mother had never mentioned her before. A coyote howled in the distance, making Isabela shrink even closer to the tree. She tried to remember the stories her mother used to tell at bedtime, stories about brave people facing their fears. But now, alone in the desert, courage seemed too far away. Near midnight, headlights finally cut through the darkness. Isabela jumped to her feet, her heart racing. The car approached slowly along the dirt road, an old pickup truck, nothing like her mother's sleek car. The vehicle stopped near the tree and an elderly woman climbed out with difficulty. She had gray hair pulled back in a messy bun and wore a simple dress covered by a wool cardigan. Her face was deeply lined, but her eyes were kind. "Isabela?" called the woman, her voice rough but welcoming. "I'm Dona Carmen. Your mother asked me to come get you." Isabela hesitated, remembering her mother's warnings about strangers. But the letter mentioned Dona Carmen, and she couldn't spend all night alone in the desert. "Do you know my mother?" Isabela asked, keeping her distance. "Yes, sweetheart. I took care of her when she was little, just like I'm going to take care of you now." Dona Carmen approached slowly as if dealing with a frightened animal. "I know you're scared, but I promise everything will be all right." There was something comforting about Dona Carmen's presence, something that reminded Isabela of her grandmother's hugs before she passed away a few years ago. The old woman carefully knelt down to Isabela's level. "Your mother left you here to protect you," she explained gently. "She's very sad about having to do this, but sometimes adults need to make hard decisions to keep the ones they love safe." Isabela felt tears returning to her eyes. "When will I see her again?" "As soon as it's safe, dear. Until then you'll stay with me in the village. I have a small house, but it's cozy. You can help me take care of my chickens and my garden. It'll be an adventure, how about that?" The girl took one last look at the road where her mother had disappeared, then at the backpack at her feet. She didn't have much choice. The night was getting colder and she was exhausted and scared. "Okay," she finally agreed, picking up her backpack. Dona Carmen smiled kindly and extended her hand. Isabela took it, feeling the comforting warmth of the old woman's gnarled fingers. Together they walked to the pickup truck. "I have hot chocolate in a thermos. said Dona Carmen while helping Isabela into the passenger seat. "And I made homemade bread this morning. You must be hungry." The pickup's interior was old but clean, with a pleasant scent of lavender and fresh bread. Dona Carmen covered Isabela with a colorful blanket before making her way to the driver's side. Within minutes, they were driving down the dirt road, leaving the solitary acacia behind. While sipping her hot chocolate, Isabela gazed through the window at the desert's starlit sky. Her heart still ached for her mother, but something about Dona Carmen's calm demeanor made her feel that maybe, just maybe, things would be all right. The pickup moved slowly along the uneven road, carrying Isabela toward a new chapter in her life, one she could never have imagined when she woke up that morning. In the passenger seat, lulled by the car's movement and exhausted from the intense day, she finally let her eyes close, still clutching her mother's letter tightly. Dona Carmen's house sat on the outskirts of Santa Rosa, a village so small it didn't appear on most maps. It was a simple adobe structure with thick walls that kept the interior cool even during the hottest days. A modest garden stretched out back, along with a small chicken coop and some fruit trees that survived thanks to the old woman's constant care. The first days were the hardest. Isabela barely touched her food and spent hours sitting on the porch, staring at the dusty road, waiting to see her mother's car appear on the horizon. The nights were even worse. She'd wake up crying, calling for Maria, and Dona Carmen would have to soothe her with stories and chamomile tea. "Your mother is a very brave woman," Dona Carmen would say while brushing the girl's hair each morning. "She's fighting against people who did wrong things like those heroes in the stories you love." Gradually, a routine began to take shape. Isabela would wake early to the rooster's crow and help Dona Carmen feed the chickens. After breakfast, which always included fresh eggs and homemade bread, they'd tend to the garden together. The old woman had infinite patience for explaining the name of each plant, teaching about when to water and how to identify weeds. "You see," Dona Carmen would show, her wrinkled hands gently clearing soil around a tomato seedling. "You must be careful with the roots. Everything alive needs time and attention to grow strong." Afternoons were devoted to studies. Even away from school, Dona Carmen insisted Isabela couldn't stop learning. The old woman had been a teacher before retiring, and her small library contained enough books to keep the girl occupied. Math, language, science, everything was taught with the same dedication they gave to the garden. At the beginning of the third week, Maria's first letter arrived. It was addressed to Dona Carmen but contained a special page for Isabela. The girl read and reread her mother's words dozens of times, memorizing every sentence. "My dearest daughter, I think of you every day, every minute. I know you must be scared and angry with me, but I want you to know that everything I'm doing is to give us a safe future. The bad people I mentioned are being investigated, and soon they won't be able to hurt us anymore. Be strong and obey Dona Carmen. She took care of me when I was your age and will take good care of you too. I love you more than anything in the world." The letter brought new life to Isabela. She began showing more interest in daily activities, asking questions about the garden and offering to help in the kitchen. Dona Carmen noticed the change and started involving the girl more in household tasks. "Your mother loved making cookies too," she remarked one day while teaching Isabela how to mix ingredients. "She always added too much cinnamon, but I never had the heart to say no when she offered them to me." The stories about Maria as a child made Isabela feel closer to her mother. She discovered that her mother had also been a restless girl who loved climbing trees and questioning everything. Dona Carmen had an impressive memory and shared every detail with affection. The nearest neighbors, though few, were kind. Mrs. Rodriguez, who lived next door, always brought fresh tortillas and stopped to chat. Her grandson Pedro, a shy 10-year-old boy, sometimes came to play with Isabela. They built a simple treehouse in the backyard, using old boards and plenty of imagination. 1 month turned into 2, and Isabela began noticing small changes in herself. Her once soft hands now had small calluses from working in the garden. Her skin was more tan from the sun, and her hair had lighter streaks. But the most significant changes were internal. She learned about patience by watching plants grow, about responsibility by caring for the chickens, about kindness through Dona Carmen's daily example, and about courage, thinking of her mother fighting against bad people to protect her. Maria's letters kept arriving regularly, always through a complex system Dona Carmen had established to ensure no one could trace their location. Each letter brought news of the progress her mother was making, gathering evidence, talking to lawyers, preparing her case. "Things are moving forward," Maria wrote in her latest letter. "The lawyer says we have a solid case. Soon I'll be able to hold you in my arms again." One evening, while helping Dona Carmen wash the dinner dishes, Isabela asked a question she'd been holding onto for weeks. Dona Carmen, aren't you afraid the bad people will find us here? The old woman dried her hands on her apron and looked at Isabela seriously. My dear, I learned long ago that fear can't stop us from doing what's right. Your mother is facing her fears to fight for justice, and we're doing our part by keeping you safe. Isabela nodded thoughtfully. Do you think she'll succeed? Your mother has always been determined. When she set her mind to something, nothing could change it. And now she has the most important reason in the world not to give up, you. Dona Carmen's words brought comfort, but they didn't stop Isabela from worrying. At night, lying in her small bed, she prayed for her mother's safety and dreamed of the day they could be together again. Time kept passing, marked by the growth of plants in the garden, by eggs collected every morning, by lessons learned and letters received. Amid the simplicity of village life, Isabela was discovering a strength she didn't know she possessed, the same strength she saw in Dona Carmen's determined eyes and her mother's brave words. Maria parked her car at the same roadside hotel for the third time that week. It was a simple place on the outskirts of town, far enough not to raise suspicions but close enough to stay informed about company events. Her third-floor room had become her makeshift office, with papers scattered across the bed and a well-worn laptop. The past weeks had been a constant exercise in caution and strategy. After leaving Isabela with Dona Carmen, Maria dove headfirst into her mission to expose the corruption scheme. Her nights were spent analyzing documents, cross-referencing information, and maintaining contact with Roberto Mendez, the corporate crime lawyer who took her case. We need to be meticulous, Roberto had said in their first meeting. They're powerful and have much to lose. One mistake could compromise the entire case. Maria picked up her now cold coffee cup, her fourth of the day, and turned her attention back to the computer screen. There lay the evidence she'd managed to gather over the past months. Doctored financial spreadsheets, inflated contracts, false invoices. The scheme was complex but left trails for those who knew where to look. Carlos Aguiar, the company's CEO, had built a network of shell companies to embezzle funds. Contracts were signed at values far above market rates, with the difference distributed among scheme participants. As CFO, Maria had access to privileged information, but it took time to connect all the dots. A knock at the door made her start. She relaxed upon hearing Sandra's voice, the housekeeper who had become her unwitting ally at the hotel. Miss Maria? I brought more coffee and some cookies. Sandra was a middle-aged woman who, noticing Maria's anxious state, had begun bringing small treats and offering words of comfort. She didn't know the details of the situation, but her maternal instinct made her want to help. Thank you, Sandra, said Maria, opening the door. You're an angel. You need to take better care of yourself, Sandra replied, placing the tray on the table. You're thinner than when you arrived. Maria forced a smile. It was true, the stress and constant worry about Isabela had affected her appetite. Her clothes hung looser and deep circles marked her eyes. After Sandra left, Maria returned to work. Her phone vibrated, a message from Roberto. Important meeting tomorrow. Got us time with a prosecutor who can help. Prepare the main documentation. Maria felt a mix of hope and apprehension. Each step toward justice was also a step closer to seeing Isabela again, but the fear of something going wrong never left her. While organizing the documents, her mind wandered to her last encounter with Carlos Aguiar, 2 weeks before fleeing with Isabela. He had called her to his office, his artificial smile barely hiding the threat in his words. Maria, you're a valuable professional for our company, he said, spinning an expensive pen between his fingers. It would be a shame if something happened to your career, or your family. She had maintained her composure, but inside she was trembling. That very night, she began planning how to protect Isabela. A noise from the street caught her attention. Maria cautiously approached the window, slightly pulling back the curtain. A black car was parked across the street with 2 men inside. Her heart raced. Were they the same ones who had followed her last week? Quickly, she began packing her most important documents into her briefcase. She had developed an escape plan for situations like this. Use the emergency stairs, catch a taxi 2 blocks away, switch hotels. The routine was becoming familiar. As she descended the stairs with her heart in her throat, Maria thought of Isabela. Her daughter was her strength, her motivation to keep fighting. The letters they exchanged through the secure system established by Dona Carmen were her only solace. In the taxi heading to another hotel, Maria allowed a few tears to escape. Missing Isabela was a constant ache in her chest. Each day away from her daughter was torture, but she knew she couldn't falter now. The new hotel was even simpler than the previous one, but offered the anonymity she needed. After settling in, Maria took out her special notebook, the one where she kept her letters to Isabela. She wrote about her day, about how close she was to achieving justice, about how much she missed her daughter's hugs and smiles. "Soon, my love," she wrote at the end. "Soon we'll be together again." Days turned into weeks and weeks into months. Maria continued her silent fight, moving between hotels, gathering evidence, building her case. Roberto was optimistic. They had gained the attention of a serious prosecutor committed to fighting corruption. "They're starting to make mistakes," Roberto explained during one of their secret meetings at a cafe away from downtown. "They're nervous, realizing the net is closing in." Maria noticed subtle changes in the company executive's behavior through contacts she still maintained. Emergency meetings were frequently called, documents were being destroyed, longtime employees dismissed without explanation. Each new development was carefully documented and added to the case they were building. Maria knew it had to be perfect, not just to ensure justice was served, but to guarantee that she and Isabela could live in peace again. At night, alone in yet another anonymous hotel room, Maria looked at Isabela's photos on her phone. Her daughter was growing up away from her, living a life she had never planned. Guilt sometimes consumed her, but then she remembered the threats, the fear in the eyes of other employees who had tried to report irregularities before, the stories she'd heard about accidents happening to people who knew too much. "Just a little longer," she whispered to herself, clutching the phone to her chest. "Hold on just a little longer." And so, day after day, Maria continued her fight. A fight that went far beyond simply exposing a corruption scheme. It was a fight for justice, for safety, for a future where she could hug her daughter without fear. A fight that demanded every ounce of her courage and determination, but one she was willing to wage until the end. The meeting with public prosecutor Dr. Antonio Vieira began promptly at 9 in the morning in his discreet office at the public ministry. Roberto Mendez presented the evidence he and Maria had gathered over the months, while Maria carefully observed the prosecutor's reactions. "These are serious accusations," said Dr. Vieira, adjusting his glasses while examining the documents. "But the material you've gathered is substantial. Especially these contracts with shell companies, there's a clear pattern here." Maria felt her heart race. After months of meticulous work, finally someone with authority was validating her discoveries. The prosecutor continued leafing through the files, occasionally making notes on his pad. "What concerns me are these international transfers," he pointed out. "Carlos Aguiar has strong political connections. We need to act quickly before he realizes we're getting close." Roberto agreed. "We've already prepared all the necessary documentation for a formal complaint. With your authorization we can—" A knock at the door interrupted the conversation. The prosecutor's secretary entered hurriedly, her face pale. "Doctor, breaking news just came out. Aguia Construction's CEO, Carlos Aguiar, is calling a press conference in an hour." Maria's blood ran cold. Carlos never gave interviews without weeks of preparation. A last-minute press conference could only mean one thing: he knew he was being investigated. "Turn on the TV," Dr. Vieira ordered. On the small office TV screen, Carlos Aguiar appeared impeccably dressed, his usual confident smile slightly tenser than normal. Behind him, a row of company executives, including some Maria recognized as scheme participants. "I come before the public today," Carlos began, "to make a serious accusation. We recently discovered that our former CFO, Maria Santos, has been attempting to manipulate company documents with the intent to blackmail us." Maria felt the floor disappear beneath her feet. They were getting ahead of her, trying to discredit her allegations before they could even come to light. "Stay calm," Roberto whispered, noticing her panic. "This was expected. They're desperate." Dr. Vieira turned off the TV and faced them with a serious expression. "This changes our strategy. They're going to try to make you the villain of this story, Maria. We need to act now." The following hours were a whirlwind of activity. While Roberto and Dr. Vieira prepared documents to file the official complaint, Maria received a disturbing call from Sandra, the hotel housekeeper. "Ms. Maria, 2 men were here asking about you. They showed badges, but something about them didn't seem right. Don't tell anyone you spoke to me, Sandra. And thank you for everything." Maria hung up the phone with trembling hands. They were moving fast, trying to locate her. Her immediate thought went to Isabela. Were they looking for her daughter too? "We need police protection," said Roberto, noticing her concern. "Dr. Vieira, can you?" "Already arranging it," the prosecutor replied, hanging up his own phone. "I have a trusted team that will ensure your safety, Maria." And I'll assign some agents to discreetly check on your daughter's location. Maria felt a lump in her throat. I can't risk them finding her. She's all I have. Trust the system, Dr. Vieira said firmly. You did the right thing by exposing this scheme. Now we'll ensure justice is served. The next 48 hours were crucial. While the media buzzed with Carlos Aguiar's accusations against Maria, Dr. Vieira formally presented the complaint to the presiding judge, along with all the documents and evidence they had gathered. After preliminary review of the material, the judge immediately authorized searches at the shell company's headquarters and froze the main suspect's bank accounts. The operation was kept secret until the last moment. Maria watched from the TV in her safe house as police finally entered Aguiar Construction's headquarters. Carlos Aguiar was arrested while trying to leave the building through the garage, along with 2 other directors. The seized computers and documents confirm everything, Dr. Vieira informed by phone. We even found evidence of other schemes we didn't know about. You were right on all counts, Maria. News of Carlos Aguiar's arrest dominated the headlines. Journalists who days earlier had treated him as a victim now revealed details of the corruption scheme. Former employees began coming forward with new allegations, confirming the pattern of threats and intimidation. But even with the apparent victory, Maria couldn't relax. She knew there were still people connected to the scheme who remained free, people who might seek revenge. Her concern only grew when Roberto arrived with disturbing news. They intercepted a call between 2 executives who fled, he explained. They mentioned something about finding the girl. I think they're looking for Isabela. The fear Maria had dreaded materialized. Even with Carlos arrested, the danger hadn't passed. She needed to act quickly to protect her daughter. We need to get her out of there, said Maria, already reaching for her phone. I can't risk them finding her. I'll arrange a team to handle the transfer safely, offered Dr. Vieira. We can move her to a more secure location until this whole situation is resolved. Maria shook her head. No. Enough running, enough hiding. It's time to bring my daughter home. The decision was made. With support from the police and public ministry, Maria could finally reunite with Isabela. But first they needed to ensure the path was clear of any threats. The net had closed around the corrupt officials, but the battle for her family's safety wasn't completely over yet. At Dona Carmen's small adobe house, Isabela was watering the garden plants when she heard the sound of approaching cars. It was unusual to see more than one vehicle at a time on the dusty road leading to the village. Curious, the girl approached the gate, still holding the watering can. 2 black cars and a police vehicle stopped in front of the house. From the first vehicle, a familiar figure emerged, and the watering can fell from Isabela's hands, spilling water on the dry earth. Mommy, she whispered, barely believing her eyes. Maria looked different, thinner, with shorter hair and some gray streaks that weren't there before. But her smile, oh, that smile that Isabela saw every night in her dreams, remained exactly the same. Isabela? Maria opened her arms, her choked voice carrying months of contained longing. The girl stood frozen for a moment, as if fearing this was just another of the many dreams she'd had during those months. Then, as if something inside her broke, she ran toward her mother. Mommy? Mommy? Mommy, she repeated between sobs, throwing herself into Maria's arms. Mother and daughter hugged as if their lives depended on it. Maria covered Isabela's face with kisses, her own tears mixing with her daughter's. The police officers and others present watched the emotional scene, respecting this intimate moment of reunion. Dona Carmen appeared at the door, her face marked by tears of joy. She observed the scene with a serene smile, knowing her mission was complete. Maria looked at her over Isabela's head and mouthed a silent thank you. You look different, said Isabela, touching her mother's face with her small hands. Your hair. You look different too, my love, replied Maria, noticing how her daughter had grown. The desert sun had tanned her skin, and her eyes seemed more mature, wiser. You're taller? Dona Carmen fed me well, Isabela smiled. She makes the best bread in the world. And she taught me to take care of the garden. Look. She proudly pointed to the well-tended beds. Maria looked around, absorbing the details of the place that had been her daughter's refuge. The garden was in bloom, with ripe tomatoes on the vines and aromatic herbs perfuming the air. Chickens pecked lazily in the yard, and a simple treehouse rose in one corner. Come see my room. Isabela pulled her mother's hand, eager to show her world of the past months. The room was small but cozy, with colorful drawings on the walls and a small bookshelf. On the desk, there was a vase with garden flowers and an open notebook where Isabela practiced her handwriting. I kept all your letters, the girl said, pulling out a decorated box from under the bed. I read them every night before bed. Maria sat on the bed with Isabela, holding the box of letters. I kept all of yours too, my love. They gave me strength to keep fighting. The bad people, they won't hurt us anymore? No, dear. They've been arrested. We did the right thing, reporting what they were doing wrong, and now they'll pay for their crimes. Isabela hugged her mother again, tighter this time. I was scared. Sometimes I thought you wouldn't come back. I would always come back for you. Maria kissed the top of her daughter's head. You're the most important person in my life. Everything I did was to protect you. In the kitchen, Dona Carmen prepared coffee and cookies, giving mother and daughter space to reconnect. The police officers maintained discreet surveillance of the perimeter, ensuring everyone's safety. Dona Carmen took such good care of me, said Isabela. She told me stories about when you were little. Is it true that you liked climbing trees too? Maria laughed, remembering her own childhood under Dona Carmen's care. It's true. She was always like a second mother to me. And now to you too. The afternoon passed quickly as Isabela showed her mother every corner of her life in the village. The chicken coop where she helped collect eggs every morning, the vegetable garden she had helped plant, the treehouse she built with Pedro. Can we say goodbye to Pedro before we go? Asked Isabela, her voice betraying a bit of sadness for the first time. Of course, sweetie. Actually, Maria hesitated, choosing her words. I was thinking we could stay a few more days here if you'd like. So you can say proper goodbyes to everyone and I can properly thank Dona Carmen. Isabela's eyes lit up. Really? Can we? Yes. And later, when we return home, we can visit whenever you want. This place and these people will always be part of our lives now. That night, Dona Carmen prepared a special dinner to celebrate the reunion. The simple kitchen table was filled with homemade dishes, fresh bread, vegetable stew from the garden, tortillas made by Mrs. Rodriguez, who insisted on joining the celebration. As they ate and talked, Maria watched her daughter with a heart overflowing with love and gratitude. Isabela wasn't exactly the same girl she had left under the acacia months ago. She was stronger, more independent, with a wisdom in her eyes that only difficult experiences can bring. Later, when Isabela was already asleep, Maria and Dona Carmen sat on the porch, watching the stars shining brightly in the desert sky. I can never thank you enough, said Maria, holding the old woman's wrinkled hands. Seeing you two together again is all the thanks I need, replied Dona Carmen with a gentle smile. You did what you had to do to protect your daughter. And she understands that. Maria nodded, feeling tears return to her eyes. She's grown so much. Children are stronger than we imagine, said Dona Carmen. And a mother's love can move mountains. The two women sat in silence, sharing the moment of peace. In the distance, a coyote howled, and the gentle wind rustled the leaves of the garden trees. It was a perfect night for a new beginning. The days following their reunion were ones of adaptation and healing for Maria and Isabela. After a week in the village, they finally returned to the city, where a new life awaited them. The apartment where they lived before had been sold. Maria knew they needed a fresh start in every way. With part of the compensation money she received from the company, Maria bought a small but cozy house in a quiet neighborhood. The property had a backyard where Isabela immediately began planting her own garden, applying everything she had learned from Dona Carmen. We can plant tomatoes here, she said excitedly, showing her mother the spaces she had chosen for each type of plant. And over there in the corner we'll make an herb garden, just like Dona Carmen had. Readjusting to school life was an initial challenge for Isabela. Although the lessons with Dona Carmen had kept her learning up to date, returning to the routine of a regular school required patience. Maria chose to enroll her in a smaller school, where the principal, informed of the situation, could give special attention to the case. She's doing very well, Isabela's teacher commented during a parent-teacher meeting. She has a different maturity from other children her age. And her essays about the time she spent in the village are impressive. Maria also went through her own changes. With the case against Aguia Construction concluded and Carlos Aguiar and his accomplices imprisoned, she was invited to work at an auditing firm specializing in investigating corporate fraud. Her case had become an example of courage and integrity in the business world. You know the system from the inside now, her new boss said during the interview. You can identify signs that others might miss. And more importantly, you had the courage to do the right thing even when it meant sacrificing everything. Friday nights became sacred for mother and daughter. That's when they would make together the homemade bread that Dona Carmen had taught Isabela to bake. The smell of yeast and flour filled the house, bringing sweet memories of their time in the village. I think I added too much cinnamon again, Isabela laughed, remembering the stories Dona Carmen told about her mother's childhood. It's perfect just like that, Maria responded, hugging her daughter from behind as she kneaded the dough. Exactly as it should be. Once a month, they made the trip to Santa Rosa to visit Dona Carmen. The old woman continued tending to her garden and chickens, and her eyes always lit up when she saw them arriving. Pedro, who had become Isabela's best friend during her stay, eagerly awaited these visits to show off the latest additions to the treehouse. It's different now, Isabela commented during one of these return trips. When I'm there, I miss our home. Before it was the opposite. Maria squeezed her daughter's hand, understanding perfectly what she meant. That's how it should be, my love. We can have more than one place in our hearts. The emotional healing process was gradual. There were nights when Isabela still woke up frightened, needing to make sure her mother was really there. Maria also had her moments of guilt and anxiety, especially when she saw the small changes she had missed in her daughter's life. To help with the process, both began therapy. Dr. Paula, their psychologist, helped them process the trauma of their separation period and rebuild their relationship on even stronger foundations. You two went through something very difficult, Dr. Paula explained. But the love and honesty you maintain with each other is the best tool for healing. The garden Isabela planted grew strong and beautiful, just like her. Each new flower that bloomed, each vegetable she proudly harvested was a symbol of her own ability to overcome adversity and flourish. Maria in turn found new purpose in her work. Beyond her normal responsibilities, she began giving lectures to other companies about corporate ethics and the importance of reporting irregularities. Her story inspired others to have the courage to do the right thing. 1 year after their return, they organized a thank you party at their new home. Dona Carmen was the guest of honor, along with Dr. Vieira, Roberto, and all those who had helped them during the difficult period. The backyard was decorated with flowers from Isabela's garden, and the aroma of homemade bread filled the air. "Look at you too," said Dona Carmen, her eyes watering. "How you've grown." And it was true. The period of separation, though painful, had transformed both mother and daughter. Maria learned that courage doesn't mean the absence of fear, but doing what's right despite it. Isabela discovered an inner strength she didn't know she possessed, and a capacity for adaptation that surprised her. Together they built a new life, one based not only on the love they always had for each other, but also on the strength they discovered in themselves. Fear had given way to confidence, uncertainty to stability. In the garden they created together, among the ripe tomatoes and aromatic herbs, between Saturday afternoon laughter and the scent of fresh bread, mother and daughter found not just a new beginning, but a deeper and truer way of being family. And so, the story that began with an impossible decision under a solitary acacia in the desert ended with a lesson about love, courage, and humanity's capacity to rebuild after storms. Maria and Isabela moved forward, carrying the scars of their journey not as marks of pain, but as reminders of the strength they discovered along the way. Their experience stood as a testament to the extraordinary power of maternal love, the courage to stand up for what's right, and the resilience of the human spirit. In the end, they learned that sometimes the most difficult choices can lead to the most meaningful transformations, and that true strength often emerges from our most vulnerable moments. This intimate tale of sacrifice, survival, and reunion reminds us all that even in our darkest hours, hope and love can light the way forward, and that the bonds between parent and child can withstand the most challenging of storms. Under the same stars that once watched over their separation, Maria and Isabela now built new memories together, their hearts stronger for having weathered the journey that brought them home.